The towel landed softly, but it sounded like a bomb going off in his heart. Muhammad Ali sat on the stool in his corner, and for the first time in his life, he did not protest when the fight was stopped. It was October 2nd, 1980, and the parking lot of Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas had become the site of something that felt less like a boxing match and more like a public execution. 10 rounds. That was all his body could give him. 10 rounds against Larry Holmes, the man who had once carried his bags, once served as his sparring partner, once looked up to him like a god. Now that man stood in the opposite corner, tears streaming down his face, and Muhammad Ali could not understand why the winner was crying. The crowd was silent in that terrible way. Crowds become silent when they have witnessed something they wish they could unsee. 36,000 people had gathered in the desert night, paying unprecedented prices to watch the greatest return to glory. Instead, they had watched a ghost try to fight a living man. Ali was 38 years old, and his body had become a stranger to him. The speed that had once made him untouchable was gone. The reflexes that had allowed him to dodge punches by millimeters had slowed to ordinary human time. The legs that had danced for 15 rounds against the most dangerous fighters in the world now felt like they were wrapped in concrete. But worse than any of that, worse than the physical decline that everyone could see, was what was happening inside his head. The punches he wanted to throw arrived at his fists a half-second late. The combinations he visualized never made it to his arms. It was as if the connection between his brain and his body had developed static, an interference pattern that turned his intentions into approximations. He did not know it yet, but this was Parkinson's disease, already beginning its long, patient theft of everything he had been. Imagine yourself in that corner with him, the smell of sweat and blood and the petroleum jelly they smeared on fighters' faces, the sound of the crowd, muffled now, as if heard through water, the harsh lights beating down, exposing every bruise, every swelling, every year that had accumulated on a face that had once been called the prettiest in boxing. Angelo Dundee stood before him, the trainer who had been with him since the beginning, since the young Cassius Clay had first walked into a gym and announced that he would be the greatest of all time. Dundee's eyes were wet. His hands were shaking as he reached for the towel that would end it. "That's it, champ," Dundee said, his voice cracking. "That's enough." And Ali, the man who had never quit, who had fought through broken jaws and temporary blindness and the accumulated damage of 100 brutal rounds, simply nodded. He did not argue. He did not insist on continuing. Something in him knew that this was different. This was not a fight he was losing. This was a fight he had already lost, somewhere in the years between his last victory and this desperate attempt at resurrection. Close your eyes and feel the weight of that surrender. For a man who had built his entire identity on refusing to give up, on proclaiming his greatness in the face of every doubt, on standing when the world expected him to fall, this quiet acceptance was perhaps the most difficult act of his life. The fight had been a mismatch from the beginning, though the world had not wanted to see it. Ali had been retired for 2 years, had ballooned in weight, had shown none of the sharpness that had defined his career. But he was still Muhammad Ali, and people wanted to believe. They wanted to believe in miracles. They wanted to believe that greatness could be recaptured by will alone. He had wanted to believe it too. That was the cruelest part. According to those who were close to him during the training camp, Ali had convinced himself that he could do it. He had lost weight, trained hard, told everyone who would listen that he would shock the world one more time. The old rhythms came back in glimpses. The old phrases returned to his lips. "I'm gonna dance. I'm gonna float. Holmes don't know what's coming." But the body knows what the mind refuses to accept. And Ali's body, even as he pushed it through training, was sending signals that he could not or would not hear. Let your breathing slow as you enter the memory of that night. The desert air cool after the heat of the day. The lights of Las Vegas glittering in the distance like false promises. The ring erected in the parking lot, a stage for tragedy disguised as sport. Holmes had not wanted this fight. According to those who knew him, he had begged Ali not to come back. He had seen enough in their sparring sessions years earlier to know that time was undefeated. He had watched the erosion that others refused to acknowledge, but Ali had insisted, and the money was too good, and the promoters wanted it. And so they found themselves standing across from each other in the ring while the crowd roared for something that could not happen. From the first round, it was clear. Holmes, in his prime at 30 years old, was faster, stronger, sharper. His jab found Ali's face again and again, piling up points, piling up damage. Ali tried to summon the old magic, tried to dance, tried to make Holmes miss. But the dance was a shuffle now, and Holmes did not miss. Picture each round as a small death. Ali coming out hopeful, trying combinations that arrived too late. Holmes answering with crisp counters that Ali could not avoid. The crowd growing quieter as the rounds passed, their cheers turning to prayers, turning to silence. By the 5th round, Ali's corner was worried. By the 7th, they were discussing stopping it. But how do you stop Muhammad Ali? How do you tell the greatest fighter in history that he cannot fight anymore? The answer came in the 10th round, when Holmes landed a combination that sent Ali stumbling into the ropes. He did not go down. Ali almost never went down. But something in his eyes changed. The fire that had burned there for 20 years flickered and dimmed. Bundini Brown, the cornerman who had invented the phrase "float like a butterfly, sting like a bee," could not watch anymore. He turned away, tears streaming down his face, unable to witness what was happening to the man he loved. Breathe with the rhythm of that terrible round, the thud of punches landing, the grunt of effort and pain. The referee moving closer, watching, waiting to see if he needed to intervene. When the bell rang to end the 10th, Ali walked back to his corner with the slow deliberation of a man who had run out of options. He sat on the stool. He looked at Dundee, and in that look was something that no one had ever seen from Muhammad Ali before. Permission. He was giving Dundee permission to end it. The towel flew. The referee waved his arms. And the career of the greatest heavyweight champion in history came to an end. Not with a knockout, but with a surrender. The moments that followed exist in a strange haze in the memories of those who were there. Holmes crossing the ring to embrace Ali, sobbing openly, apologizing for winning. Ali accepting the embrace without words, his face swollen, his eyes distant. "I love you, man," Holmes kept saying. "I'm sorry. I love you." And Ali, who always had something to say, who had talked his way into and out of 1,000 situations, simply nodded. The words were gone. The performance was over. Close your eyes and feel the aftermath settling over that desert parking lot. The crowd dispersing slowly, many of them in tears, all of them having witnessed something they would never forget. The ring being dismantled, piece by piece, the stage of tragedy becoming just another parking lot again. Ali was helped back to his dressing room by his entourage. The walk was long, and he moved like a man carrying an invisible weight. Reporters lined the corridor, shouting questions, but for once, Ali had no answers. He just walked, step by step, toward the privacy where he could fall apart without the world watching. The dressing room was quiet. The celebration that usually followed a fight, win or lose, was absent. People sat or stood in various postures of grief, unable to meet each other's eyes. Someone had brought ice, and they pressed it against Ali's swollen face, but he barely seemed to notice. According to those who were present, Ali finally spoke about an hour after the fight. His voice was soft, hoarse from the punishment his throat had taken. "I didn't quit," he said. "They stopped it. I didn't quit." It was important to him, that distinction. He had never quit. He had been stopped, but he had not quit. In a career built on defiance, on refusing to accept any limitation the world tried to place on him, this technical difference mattered. But everyone in that room knew the truth. Something had quit inside Ali during that fight. Some essential belief in his own invincibility. He had met his limits, finally, irrevocably. And no amount of semantic distinction could change that. Let yourself drift into the hours that followed, the long ride back to the hotel, the ice packs and the painkillers, and the silence that filled the spaces where celebration should have been. Ali lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, his wife Veronica beside him, neither of them knowing what to say. What does a man think when he discovers that he is mortal? What passes through the mind of someone who has spent their entire adult life proclaiming their own greatness, only to have time and nature prove them wrong? We cannot know for certain what Ali thought that night. His inner life remained private, protected by the persona he had created and by the increasing difficulty of communication that would mark his remaining years. But we can imagine. We can picture him lying in that hotel room, the lights of Las Vegas visible through the window, and wondering where it had all gone. The speed, the power, the absolute certainty that he could overcome any obstacle through sheer force of will. He had been wrong. Will was not enough. The body has its own wisdom, its own timeline, its own inevitable decline. And Muhammad Ali, for all his greatness, was subject to the same laws as everyone else. Breathe deeply and feel the weight of that realization. It is perhaps the hardest truth any of us must face. We are not permanent. Our strength fades. Our skills diminish. The things that define us slip away one by one until we must find new definitions or lose ourselves entirely. The aftermath of the Holmes fight would be long and painful. Ali would fight once more against Trevor Berbick in 1981, losing again, this time definitively. He would be diagnosed with Parkinson's syndrome in 1984, the disease that had probably begun years earlier, perhaps even before the Holmes fight. He would spend the remaining 35 years of his life learning to be someone other than the fighter he had been. But all of that was still to come. On this night, there was only the immediate reality of defeat, the swelling that would take weeks to subside, the questions from reporters that would fill newspapers around the world, the concern from those who loved him about what he would do next. According to those who spoke with him in the days following the fight, Ali did not express regret for having come back. He did not apologize for putting himself and his loved ones through the ordeal. He simply said that he had to try. He had to know. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try," he said. "I had to find out if it was still there." It was not there. The magic was gone. The greatness that had defined him for 2 decades had finally, inevitably, faded. But there was a kind of courage in the trying, a refusal to simply accept the verdict of time without testing it. Close your eyes and let the night settle into peace. The fight is over. The crowd has gone home. The ring has been dismantled. And somewhere in a Las Vegas hotel room, a man who was once the greatest is learning to be something else. Not a failure. Never a failure. To be brought down by time is not failure. It is humanity. Every champion falls eventually. Every record is broken. Every king makes way for the next. Ali's legacy would not be diminished by this loss, or by the loss that followed. If anything, it would be enhanced. The world would come to see him not just as a fighter, but as a man who faced every challenge, including the challenge of his own decline, with courage and grace. Sleep now, as Ali eventually slept that night, after the ice had melted and the painkillers had done their work and the silence had grown comfortable. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own chances to define what greatness means when the ring is no longer available. He would light an Olympic torch with trembling hands. He would travel to war zones to free hostages. He would become a symbol of endurance and dignity that transcended anything he had achieved in boxing. But that is all tomorrow. Tonight, there is only rest, and the quiet acceptance that comes when we finally stop fighting the unfightable. Larry Holmes would go on to defend his title many more times. He would become one of the great heavyweight champions in his own right. But he would never escape the shadow of this night. The night he beat his hero and wept because of it. Some victories feel like defeats. Some defeats reveal strengths we never knew we had. And some nights in Las Vegas change everything, not because of what was won or lost, but because of what was learned. The towel has landed, the fight is over, and the greatest is becoming something else, something perhaps even greater than a champion. A man who can face his own limits and still find reasons to go on. Rest now. The night is long, but it ends. And when the sun rises over the desert, there will be time to begin again. There is always time to begin again.